Hello everyone and welcome to Timo and Julian Talk Philosophy. Hello Julian, bună
He-
ziua, ce mai
Hello,
face?
hello. It's really good to be back.
Yes, it's today we will talk about monarchy and monarchism. I'm Timo Schmitz and I'm here with Julian Mitra. So Julian, if I understand you right, you are the one who uses the anthropological analysis from our team. So, what do you think is monarchy from an anthropological viewpoint?
It's quite complex in many ways. To say so, how I see monarchies nowadays, they are a type of symbol for many nations, usually former empires, and especially states that had colonies around the world. Monarchies pretty much, in a sense, links the identity of the nation with a type of glorious past that was a little bit more recent, but in also it kind of accentuates a type of lineage. So basically, a type of continuity in that nation that is symbolized through the succession of monarchs. And this succession basically kind of creates a type of national timeline. Usually in countries where monarchies are still present, they pretty much see the past as a chronology based on the succession of various monarchs. The culture that various monarchs created in their time, because when you have states that had monarchies, and especially stable ones, usually the tendency is that the monarchy plus, let's say, the cultural and economical elite that was gravitating around it, they kind of were the creators of uh, the national culture and the cultural trends for certain eras. The most, I don't know, the easiest example that we can give is like the Victorian age. Everybody knows the Victorian age. We know it maybe through the lens of Victorian fashion, Victorian architecture, Victorian mannerisms. So pretty much it's not only about the political component that comes with the monarchy. It's a type of cultural continuity and a type of national timeline that was very much based on the succession of monarchs.
But we should not underestimate the public because let's take France as an example where there happened to be anti-monarchical uprisings leading to the French Revolution. It's a kind of many events that happened together that we call nowadays the French Revolution, and there we see the exact, let's say, opposite. During the time of the French Revolution, there were some years where it was kind of where you could be persecuted if you looked like too monarchical elitarian. Like if it looked like you are for the king, you were probably executed because they just got rid of the king. So here it was like the exact opposite, that anything that linked to the old monarchy was seen as backwarded and had to be abolished. However, I think we should really go like also to the modern, to what is important for us today. And it seems that we have two kinds of monarchies today. On the one hand, we have representative monarchies. We find them a lot in Europe, like, yes, you already mentioned the United Kingdom. We find them in the Netherlands. We find them in Scandinavia. We find them in Monaco, in Spain. So there are a lot of countries still in Western Europe, especially, that have representative monarchy. And then, or also Northern Europe. And then we really do have absolutist states, monarchical states, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, or Brunei, which actually are still, let's say, to a certain degree, where there is not just they do not just have a representative function, but where they also have a certain political power, especially, for example, in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where they actually still do have the say.
Yeah,
Where
usually countries that you'll find them with the title of sultanate.
Yes. So we have to differ between these two kinds of monarchies today, between those who are actually democratical countries with a parliament and those countries where we still do have a single person reign or a family reign in some kind. So how do they differ today? I mean, except that the one are democratically and have liberal values, while the others decide themselves what is right and what is wrong, and in this way, of course, also produce censorship and also, yes, restrict the rights.
I think it's a very interesting thing, especially when you put it in our current context, because especially when it comes to the situation that we have in Europe, the monarchs pretty much they are a type of symbol. They have extremely limited powers when it comes to legislation and what their involvement in actual political life. Usually, when we are talking about monarchies, they usually come with the idea of a symbol. I really want to accentuate this thing because the thing is that as we have the majority of the cultural landscapes in countries that still have monarchies, their current culture and the way in which things are run are very much decentralized. So pretty much the royal families and the people that are around them, that gravitate around them, they do not hold a monopoly on, let's say, identity, culture, the arts, and so on. I think this is a huge thing that I see as a difference from an anthropological point of view, is the fact that unlike in, let's say, the old days, when like the monarchy was pretty much the one that um, had a monopoly on intellectual culture and everything that had to do with it. Nowadays, things are more decentralized, especially because we have a very well-developed university system network. A lot of people go there. Like education is not like class-based. You don't access education only, or you don't have access to education due to your class. Pretty much education is much more widely available. Plus the press, and mass media in general. So things, I think, they are more fragmented. And if the royal families would like to have a monopoly on public opinion and culture and stuff like that, I think it will be pretty much impossible to a certain extent.
But what do they actually represent today?
I think they are much more of, as I said, of a type of symbol of continuity, because the countries that are monarchies nowadays were usually, and especially in the case of Europe, were usually countries that were very influential. Either they were regional or global empires, and they pretty much, I think, the royal families are kind of a reminder of how the current state, the current country, kind of is linked to what was in the past, to a past that in many ways, and then this is especially the framing that is current in monarchies, the past, and especially the colonial past in the case of many nations, is very like, sublime, very romanticized.
But to me, they seem like a relic from a long ago time. And we all know that the colonial past, no matter how much some people romanticize it, was a terrible past. The time.
I totally agree that. I mean, the first thing that comes into my mind, and I think this is the worst example of, it's like the extreme. King Leopold II and what happened in Congo.
Yes, and Congo was his personal property. Like the people there were his some kind of personal slave.
It was not. It didn't even have like the let's say the legal status that traditional colonies, to say in quotation marks, had. Like in what we had colonies in North America and let's say Latin America. It wasn't even that. I think what happened in Congo was like the pinnacle of how toxic and destructive and greed-based colonialism was actually.
So the question, of course, that if they are a relic of a long ago time, why would we need them today as a kind of representation? Because they seemingly represent something which is not, let's say, worth to be honored if we look into their past. And I mean not about every, but about almost every monarchy.
I think it's a thing with owning the past, because it's very hard for a country that basically built its historical narrative on how great colonialism was, because every country that was a colonial power basically has this syndrome of like being like the one that brought civilization. They basically came and civilized like the savages, from
yes, but we also know that it is ahistorical today. I mean, we know that there were great kingdoms in Africa before the colonists came.
But this is still like the narrative. This is the narrative, because if you admit the fact that places like Africa, let's say what you had the states, the pre-colonial states in the Gulf of Guinea in Africa, some of them were actually advanced from like technological and let's say from the point of view of their spiritual and intellectual culture, and they were destroyed by people that wanted to basically to control those lands and to transform them into colonies, because the extraction of resources was the main preoccupation when it came to colonies.
So now that we see that the narrative does not fit reality in any way, the question is, even if there are still some people holding up this narrative, I mean, we are in a time where this is questioned. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement showed this too clearly. And in this way, we can say, so if people are aware today that this was just a created narrative, but far beyond reality, it would be no problem to abolish these old relics. Or
what I see the problem with this, because I also see like colonialism feel like negative perspective, but what I see is like two things. You can have the owning the past, thing, and you can have it in two ways. You can have like owning the past in the way that we are conscious of the bad that was done in our historical past as a nation through colonialism. This is the case. And we basically want to acknowledge that and to make a type of correction, okay? But we can have the flip side of that, in which we own our past, but the past is the past, and the present is the present, and what was done in the past will remain in the past, and we cannot do anything about it. The same thing, and I think this is a bit of a stretch when it comes to a comparison. I see the same type of discussions in Eastern Europe when it came to communism. Should we put down, the statues of Lenin? What was it good? Was it bad? I mean, on one hand, you always had the argument, with like the negative things, but you also had the argument in which we said that we need to own our past, and also like the negative aspects are part of our past. This was an argument actually used in my city when some people wanted to demolish a statue that was from the socialist era, because they had the argument, we need to own our past, and we don't need to destroy everything that reminds us of our past. So it's a very tricky question, very tricky thing to actually debate in many ways.
But it can, not every place can be compared with another. I mean, for example, here in Germany, it is evident that we chose what you say, the first part, that we are conscious of our past, and that we don't say it was past, so let's go on, but that we are really, our past is really an important part of our present consciousness, because of how gruesome the Nazis were. So that it is not just something where we can say it happened, but where we have to be sure that it will never happen again. So that's the one. Then we have, of course, other types of government, like we had with socialist states. But socialist states, for example, cannot be compared to fascism, because we all know that that the Nazis killed over 6 million people. So it's not. So it can't be compared to any other event.
There was like this counter argument, like communism like killed also people, but also is it like a very productive thing to like examine like a political standpoint, an ideology, if you like how many people did it killed? This is also
it's not the question of only examining of how many people it killed, but on how much freedom the people had. And like in the Nazi regime, you were immediately killed if you protected a person who fought differently, if you just even had your own opinion. And
also, one thing that really strikes me as a type of similarity, because there are overlapping themes and like, certain cores that are common. Usually when colonialism started, and this is like relates a lot to the idea of monarchies and how things were actually justified. Usually when, let's say in Africa or in North America, how do you actually justify you as a country invading basically other people's lands and like enslaving them, and like after that exploiting all of their resources, and those people become either slave, either, I don't know, second class citizen. Basically it was a similar thing that the Nazis did. There was this idea that the colonizers were genetically and culturally superior to like the people that they came in contact with, and the natives from the territory, like the Africans and the Native Americans from North America, they were considered, they were like painted as savages, as genetically inferior. So this was basically a type of mind gymnastics in which you could basically say that, those people, they would not ever have the minds and the resources needed to create something productive with that land. So we come here and we take the resources, and we maybe it's more beneficial for them even to be second class citizens in our colonies than to be like free people as they were before we came.
Yes, so at first, just to make this clear, I'm not saying that everything in socialist society, for example, in Germany went well, but you can see this especially with Germany. You cannot compare like the Nazi regime with the GDR, with Eastern Germany. I mean, the Nazis killed so many people, and there was no mass murder in the GDR. Of course, this does not legitimate automatically what happened in the GDR. You know, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that just because one is worse, the other is nothing. So
No,
you know,
and a basic difference between how, let's say, communism, chose its victims, and like Nazism. Nazism basically chose its victims. Those people that were considered, in need for extermination on the basis that they were genetically bad in certain ways. On the other hand, the communists basically were more against certain social classes, and there were cases, when you are in a social class, you can, let's say, make a type of switch to a more inferior status, and it will be okay. So basically, they didn't saw people as intrinsically bad or flawed. It was more like the social place that they took in society, and how that interacted with how they exploited and had a hierarchy by comparison to other classes.
but they could be educated to good proletarians.
Yeah,
See, that was the
exactly.
difference.
You could be converted.
Yes, they were not intrinsically bad by birth.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go back to like the thing with the colonies. How do you see this motivation that basically the states basically created in order to justify their presence there?
It's difficult because they they did not have the awareness of human rights, and that's the first problem. They had the self identity of superiority, and we know on the first episode that we had on identity, that identity is subjective. So we have to understand how it could happen. We have to understand the image that they had, their identity that they had, and according to their identity, they had the image of hierarchies first within their own society. We know this, for example, that in France during the time of monarchy, you had like three social levels, right? There was the first class, the second class, and the third class. And it seems to me that they wanted to adjust this kind of hierarchies outside of their country, so that they said like, okay, then if there are even ranks in their own society, then there are ranks outside of their own society, and because they themselves thought superior of their own society, the other societies automatically had to be below or underneath their own social class or their own social society, which led to the fact that they developed the idea that the people abroad could be even more exploited than the people they already exploited domestically.
Because there already was like classism within the society back home, like
Exactly.
so it was no surprise that when they came in contact with like the natives, and they didn't understand anything about like their culture and how they uh, had their worldview. Like the result was pretty much you could predict it.
Exactly. And this goes even further because there was not just until Grotius, there was no human rights as such, which means there were not only no human rights for the people in colonies, there were also no human rights, in fact, for the people in your own country. The idea that people in your own country that they have a basic rights, it happened in, like we can say it happened in Great Britain and France when people fought for their, let's say, for the right that no one can touch them, that they do have a protection as human beings. It happened in these two countries very clearly. And already Grotius made clear that within the exchange of countries, that there cannot be a superior, because he showed that in fact, or like, I mean, I put it now in a I put it in a nutshell, so I make it short. He saw that the Westerners acted as savage as they claimed the others to be. So to say, they said the others are the primitive ones, but if we looked at the actions of the Westerners, we saw that they acted very savagely towards these people. And so he said, like, so he saw like that just because he saw like just because they say that they are superior, their deeds do not show any more civilized behavior because of the way they act towards the people they suppress. So
Okay, so basically, how this colonial past, do you think it is like a huge, you know, no to say so, in more colloquial language when it comes to making an argument that the presence in our current society of monarchies is in some way justified, because if we think so, we have another classification. We have countries like the UK, Spain, that are currently monarchies and were colonial powers. But we have another type of like monarchies of states like Liechtenstein. They never had colonies.
yes, we have to differ between these two countries, but here we have another big problem which leads us to finding any answer today. It is the word cancel culture, a big, big word. And to tell you honestly, it is difficult just because you cancel something. It does not make the past unhappen. And so, of course, I could say now that we could say we do not cancel the representative monarchy because just because they did something, abolishing them will not bring all the victims back to life. But on the other hand, we can see that representative monarchies, that they cost a lot of money. They spend a lot of money. So the whole system that they have there, and normally it is the taxpayer, right, who pays them. And the question is it still is it still in the 21st century? Should there be an obligation that the taxpayer pays for a representative monarchy, which itself did not do good in the past? So to say that they can continue their narrative or their self-identification, even if they see themselves partly different today. Of course, there are also some royals who say like who do not who do question their ancestors, but they don't question maybe their own rank. They say, okay, we have a past, but we are the future, we are a different generation. And the
Okay,
question,
what I see here is the following thing. You made a very good point with, like, the burden basically that most monarchies, and their whole apparatus kind of bring on, like, the general, let's say, taxpayer. The thing is the following, as I see it from somebody that comes from a former socialist country. The fact is the following: people that usually grow up, in the UK or in the Netherlands, it's so embedded into their national culture and in the way they are raised and in schools and in families, that they never kind of get another perspective. Or when you always bring them, the idea that the monarchy is it is like it is basically inseparable from Britishness, or from the idea of from the culture of the Netherlands. You automatically don't question, and you don't put yourself in the position of, oh, could we actually be the UK or the Netherlands without our monarchs? I think when you have a thing that is so embedded into your national culture, you just don't question it to begin with, and you don't think of alternatives to the current situation.
we find like, you can find that in Germany, any kind of remembering people who did crimes is kind of cancelled, like, I mean, in our own history. So, for example, people who served under the Nazi regime, who did not resist, they are literally there. You will not find a street named after them. You will not find any statue after them. So everything that reminds of them is put away, and you only find it in the history book. So on the one hand, we crossed them out as part of glorification. We made clear we don't want these people to be glorified. So they are this. But on the other hand, we do not forget what happened because we have history and history classes. So there are lots of museums who shows this. So there is a consciousness about this topic. So that's the one thing. But on the other hand, the terrible thing is there are still enough people here today who are right winged, and right now we kind of find really some kind of we had a series of killings, of shootings in our country conducted by right wingers. So it shows that even though we made sure that people who conducted serious crimes are not glorified in our country, their ideology still is present. So you cannot simply cross them out, even if you cross them out of your national heritage, even by showing that there is no, let's say, no heritage anymore.
I cannot agree with the idea of erasing something from your national heritage, because heritage is everything that is from your past, good or bad.
Yes,
Why it comes to national identity, that is the selection of your heritage.
Yes, but within the heritage, we made the standpoint clear. So I mean, it's if you, I make an example. If you receive something from a person who died, and you are the one who receives it, you can choose yourself what you keep and what not, right? And we have a kind of, let's say, legacy, national legacy, and we made clear like what we want to keep and what not. And basically, we did not keep anything from our past. Like, I mean, we also had a kind of monarchical past. It existed, and yet after 1945 we started like from a time zero. Like we started completely from a new beginning with a completely different system, with completely different values. So we left our past completely behind, and were conscious about our past. So we were aware that we have this legacy, and we were aware that we have to educate our future generations that such a thing will never happen again. And in the same way, there are maybe other countries, but they they don't have this point zero in the same way. And for example, with other countries, I mean, it's difficult to say point zero. You know, the point is other countries like Latvia or Lithuania who also make aware that they felt oppressed during Soviet times, and that they want to remind the people that it is part of their legacy, but that it shall not be glorified. I mean, they also have a critical view on their past, but they did not have, but their country was not literally bombed down when they became independent. They still
Yeah.
had something from the past. But the problem with modern monarchies is that they themselves never had this transformation. They never were like bombed down and had to start completely new, which means that they never really had a point where they could leave behind everything they had. And this is maybe the problem that you
I
said, the
think that
continuity.
monarchies, in like the most traditional way, they are very anti-reform. I mean, I don't, because they are such a conservative institution to begin with. I mean, they are not the type of institution that will ever be too open towards like massive change, as and maybe if the massive change even happens, it won't be like the monarchy in like the sense that we know it. The one what I see is the fact that things are very different with the way people see monarchies in like countries in which they still exist and countries in which they kind of they were abolished decades and decades ago. I see this case in Romania, where in the between war period we were a monarchy, with Greater Romania, and after that, we had the communist era, and usually what it is very like interesting is that when nowadays there is like a segment of the conservative, segment of voters and of society that regards the monarchy from like the between war period, the House of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, that they were, formidable. They were great. The first two kings were truly formidable, but the second two kings factually were not. And to be honest, the monarchy and the way Romania was run and looked in the between war period looked terribly worse than it looked after World War II, when it was massively industrialized, infrastructure was created and so on. So I think as we have this thing in which when era ends and time passes, and you kind of have this situation in which a huge chunk of time is between the point in which that thing was abolished and the present day, you kind of lose touch with reality of how things were, especially when the people that actually lived in the monarchy passed away, and you see only things through like history books or through like national discourse. Things kind of tend to become very romanticized and like steered towards a very idealized image.
Yes, yes, that's true. And I think this leads us to today's summary. And I think today you will do the summary. So you will tell us what we actually learned today.
Okay, I think the first thing that we can point out is that we have different type of monarchies in the world, and especially in Europe, we can talk about current day states that still have like functional, to say so, monarchies, and usually states that were colonial powers, as we have the case of Spain and the United Kingdom, and also states that are currently monarchies, but they never were colonial powers, as is the case of like Liechtenstein and Monaco. So they were not colonial powers. Another thing is that how we can actually come to a middle ground between accepting the past as it is and basically having a continuity, or accepting the past as it was, in the sense that we need to kind of make corrections to basically to end those institutions that we consider that were like toxic or dysfunctional, or they created more, I don't know, bad, and they had this thing of going against social progress. Um, the third thing would be the fact that in many countries that are current monarchies, because the idea of monarchy and the idea of a king, of a queen, is so embedded into their national culture, and basically from like early age participate in the Day of the Queen. There are national holidays that celebrate various monarchs from that are currently ruling or from the past. There is a lot of symbolism and heraldry all across the country that reminds you of the monarchy. It's very hard for them, like in a very personal way, to imagine their country's existence without, that monarchy, because in a way it is very hard um, to see yourself in a way, especially when you didn't see, when you were never offered to see any type of alternatives to that, institution. And in many ways, I saw this discussion, especially in regards to the United Kingdom. Maybe the more conservative branch of society kind of um, forwards this idea that maybe these countries that are monarchies will not be stable anymore if the institution of if the institution will be abolished. Um, this is this is debatable in many ways, but I think we can say that monarchies today are starting to be more and more put into question, and their legitimacy. And I think maybe we talked about neoliberalism in the fact, and the consumer society, and that we think that nowadays of everything in terms of how does it benefit us personally. Maybe if we take the idea of neoliberalism and we apply it to the monarchy, and we kind of analyze it through how much the society actually benefits from its existence, and how much the society invests into its existence, maybe sometimes we kind of come to the conclusion that the investment is much more, it's bigger than what we get out of this deal, if we see it as a deal.
So the very final question is, we have argued that you cannot compare, for example, Nazism with the Soviet rule, that these are like two completely different historical events and you cannot just compare one with the other. Can you compare monarchy with one of them, or do we have to say like monarchy is like a third dimension, like a third historical era, the era of imperialism, of which we can not compare with the other two because the other two were just too distinct and it's something that has to be seen alone, or do you think that we can compare it with one of these two?
I think it's a bit complicated because we have the following thing. We have the monarchies in the context of like the traditional empires, in which we usually talked about the pre-national state identity. And we also have the monarchies that we have nowadays, which basically they exist in the framework of national identity. So basically, they, in a weird way, even maybe the ancestors, the founding royal families were of foreign origin. They were naturalized and they pretty much kind of represent the ethos of the dominant ethnicity, or the ethnicity that holds the most economic power and privilege. So I don't think monarchies, especially nowadays, are usually acting the same way as they did when they ruled, the classic type of empire that we kind of were taught in schools, which were pretty much multinational states, multi-ethnic.
So here we can say, as the very, very last conclusion for today, on the one hand, we have seen that there was the genocide of Nazism. There were Stalinist genocides, and there were also genocides of natives, which were conducted under the name of crowns. But okay, we know that Nazism itself, there is no good variant because they always exclude someone. They always say that there's someone superior, so they are not good. With communism, it is differently. There were a lot of countries that abused the communist idea, but communism itself is not bad because they want justice and equality, so to say, social justice, and justice is something good. And maybe we can say in the end, we have with monarchy, it's maybe a bit like with communism. Monarchy itself does not need to be bad. As we can see with representative monarchies, they do not necessarily kill people or enforce something, but there were a lot of gruesome monarchs, and they are also part of the history, and we have to be conscious of them, and just canceling them out of history will not change history. So thank you very much for today's discussion. And don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give us a like. And don't forget to share this episode in social media, to share the link of this episode in social media. So thank you very much. Goodbye.